I'm recording this video to illustrate how to use a spreadsheet to apply a formula and plot it with real data. I was trying to think of something that had an example of periodic data and remembered that I could look at Google Trends and look up how frequently something is being searched. So I went to Google Trends and I looked up how frequently recipe is looked at in the United States. I did it for the past 7 days. And here's the results of that. And I think this is kind of interesting. There's this nice periodic pattern, but then on the weekend something different happens. Presumably people are looking up recipes in the morning for brunch, other information, and then once we hit Monday and Tuesday we see the pattern begin again. I want to look at that with a model in a spreadsheet, and so I can go to Google and download that as a CSV file, and I've already done that. I cleaned up the data a little bit so that I could look at it in a spreadsheet and imported it. So here are what I get when I import that into my spreadsheet. I'm using a open source spreadsheet called OpenOffice. But the things that I'm going to show will work in any spreadsheet, whether that's Google Drive, Microsoft Excel, or maybe Apple's numbers program. So here I have the time. This is a universal code based on the time in England. So this is about 11 o'clock at night, the night before. So 4 o'clock would be about midnight. So I'm going to add, so that I have my own information, I'm going to insert a column for hours, and let's call this 0, I think that's midnight, so this would be -1, 1, and rather than continue to type in all these numbers, there's a cool feature that I think was originally developed by Microsoft in Excel, but all of the programs have adopted it. You can see when you select a range, there's this little corner that if I drag it, it will continue the pattern, so it's adding 1 each time. So I'll just drag this down to the bottom of my data. There we go. And scroll back to the top. And now if I select the two columns, hours and recipe, I can insert a chart. This is how I do a graph. And I want to choose a scatter plot. Now these points are too big, so I'm going to just do joining lines and see that we've just recreated the plot that was originally on our Google website. We want to see if we can create a formula that captures that same basic dynamic, and I want to do this with a periodic function, so sine and cosine. What I need to do is I need to go through and find basically the period, and I really expect the period here to be 24 hours. Just because it's a daily pattern, we would expect that. Normally what we would do is we'd go through and we'd look for maybe the peaks. So let's find out where the peaks are. So here's a peak right here. So this is our, oops, there's our peak. So we have a peak at 18. And where's the next peak? The next peak is 42. And so the period is the difference. And I can use a calculator built into a spreadsheet. Equals, and then the first number 42 minus the second number 18, and so yeah, indeed our period is 24. So let's clear this up. We don't really want that anymore. So our period is 24. Let's find out what our maximum and minimum are. So minimum and the maximum. Our minimum looks like it's about 20. Let's go down. There's 21. Okay, so it looks like maybe our minimum's 21. The graph's in the way here. Minimum's 21. and my maximum, so it's actually changing. Let's say that it's maybe 63. And so we can find our center line, which is the average of the minimum and the maximum. So I create a formula equals, and then put in parentheses, I click on the cell with the minimum, and add, I click on the cell with the maximum, close the parentheses and divide by 2. That gives me a formula that automatically does all the arithmetic for me. You can see the formula it used in its entry cell. And so we have our center. We also need to have our amplitude. And the way we get our amplitude is it's the maximum minus the center line. So our amplitude is 21. So now we have everything we need for our formula for our prediction. So the basic formula for periodic functions, we'll put an equal sign to tell our spreadsheet that we're about to do a formula. It's equal to the center line. So I click on the cell with the center, and notice it puts F4, that's column F, row 4, this location. We add the amplitude, that's in F5, times, now we need to decide on whether we're going to do a sine or a cosine. And I can find where my maximum is. So I'll use a cosine. The formula is 2 times pi, and pi happens to be a formula, so type pi, and in a spreadsheet everything has to be a function. Pi doesn't have any entries, so it's just open and close parentheses. Notice that this actually gave me a hint that when I put the parentheses that I just closed the parentheses. So it's 2 pi divided by the period, which is in F1. There's my formula so far. So that's 2 pi over the period, times, and now I want to have my, it would be x, and the variable that is my x is hours. So I don't get to type in the variable x, but I click on the cell where the x value is. Minus, and then I say, well, what time is the first maximum? We found that first maximum at 18, so our starting value is 18. Close parentheses for the grouping. The second parentheses is to close the function for the cosine, and that's what I would have. And so I would have a prediction of 47.4. I'm not sure what the units are for Google's trends. Now if I copy that and paste it down, I want to point out that so watch this part of the screen, as I go between the two cells, my information for my periodic function was all changing. So what I need to do is I need to tell it that those values don't change. So everything in column F, I put a $sign before the letter and before the number. What that does is it says it's in column F, row 4 for every entry. And then the next column F, row 5 for the period column F, row 1. But I'm not going to put $signs on to B because that's what we call relative address. And so now if I copy and paste it in the next entry, I already have a value, so I do want to override it. Notice that now my entry is not changing. So once you get the right pattern, the one thing that is changing is the location of where my data is. So as I go down, it goes B2, B3. If I paste it again, it'll now be B4. Once you have that pattern established, you don't copy and paste anymore. You click on the little drag box and drag it to the bottom of your data. And now we have our prediction using the cosine function, and I can collect all 3 columns, insert a chart. It's a scatter plot. Don't want the dots, I want the adjoining lines. So notice it has, well, we can finish this now. It has the hour on the x-axis, and for the second and third columns it created a separate graph. So I get my recipe prediction in blue and my periodic sine and cosine function in red. And we can see how it compares. So here we can see that it really does look like there's a lot of activity in the morning. This peak is dinner time. So people are looking up the recipes at dinner time. But on Saturday and Sunday they're looking it up for breakfast and maybe brunch or throughout the day. Okay. Well, that's how you can use a spreadsheet to calculate a graph and plot it with data.